I suspect, like many of you, I have a very strong interest in this kind of unique group of birds called goatsuckers, the name of which we'll get to in just a little bit. But they're a group of birds that is rich in folklore, interesting aspects about their ecology and biology, and have gotten on Long Island increasing amount of attention. Perhaps most notably, Common Nighthawks, based on this Stone Bridge Nighthawk Watch that I and some colleagues, you may know Patrice Domichel pretty well. Patrice, we put together about 8 years ago. Once we realized that common nighthawks pass through Long Island. Again, I'm going to go into much more detail in just a little bit. So, Ariel, if you could advance the slide. I like that fancy. You see the fancy thing I did there?
It's cool.
Um, so this whole group of very interesting birds are known as the Caprimulgiformes. Formes always being the suffix for a bird order, and Capri, Latin for goat, and Mulgari, Greek to milk, and so it's to milk the goat. And you might very reasonably wonder how in the world did this group of birds ever get the name goatsuckers? A name, by the way, that some birders I've talked with, including you may know Carl Safina, who's a well-known author and birder, absolutely despises the name. But anyway, it's stuck. It's with the birds. It's persisted for centuries. And the derivation apparently is that if you look at a goatsucker mouth, just how large it is. And again, if you look at either a whippoorwill or a common nighthawk sitting there, you see this very small bill, and you might reasonably think that their bills and their mouths are really tiny. Well, their mouths are enormous, and basically they are flying mouths. For them to feed, to eat, they have to fly and just open up their mouths to grab food. And you can see how that the pink lining of the goatsucker and then the goat udders on the left there. Apparently, it was in Europe where this first was derived. European nightjars were seen flying around goat pens, and some people, I guess, after having too much mead or maybe beer hundreds of years ago, thought they saw the European nightjars locking onto the udders of these goats. Okay, next slide. And you can see from Pliny the Elder and others, they had written about this phenomenon. So you read here, the caprimulge, so-called of milk and goats, and this is his writing from many millennia ago, are like the bigger kind of owls or thrush. They be night thieves for all the day long. They see not. Well, of course they can see fine, but their matter is to come into the shepherd's coats and goat pens and to the goats' udders. Presently they go and suck the milk at their teats. And once basically the udder is milked, it gives us no more milk. The goatsucker was thought to poison the udder, and then the goats shortly after that would become blind. Another interpretation from way back was taken from a book I saw, 1973 book. When I was in Switzerland, I saw an aged man who fed his goats upon the mountain, which I'd gone up in search for plants. I asked him whether he knew of a bird the size of a marula, Eurasian blackbird, blind in the daytime. Again, this thought that they couldn't see during the day, but keen of sight at night, which in the dark is wont to suck goat udders, so that afterwards the animals go blind. Now he replied that he had suffered himself many losses from these very birds, so that he once had 6 she-goats blinded, but possibly that aged man was jesting with me. So again, for a very long time, for centuries, or 2 millennia, it's believed that these birds were ominous and caused the destruction of livestock. Okay, next. And then you can see yet one last thing. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just about this perception about the goatsuckers having being birds of bad omens. Where again, I won't read the whole thing, but the belief that particularly if you had a whippoorwill or chuckwill's widows that would start calling occasionally from a windowsill of a house, that was a certain belief that someone in that house was going to soon pass. So again, a bird that is rich in folklore. You can see this. I appreciate the word. I hadn't seen it in a while. The pertinacity, with which superstitious traditions cling to people is well known. And this is, again, this is really clung for many, many years, even though, of course, there's no evidence that this happens. But you see from these slides just how enormous the mouths are of Chuckwell's widows and whippoorwills and certain common nighthawks as well, although that bird's flying. Next one, Ariel. In terms of their evolutionary relationship, this is subject of, I can't say debate, but I don't think it's been fully settled yet. Like so much of taxonomy, it's constantly changing with further research. But right now, it's thought that the goatsuckers are kind of placed in between the owls based on the type and nature of their feathers, very soft or very analogous to what owls have or similar. And then their weak feet, because they really do generally have weak feet. They really can't cling to a branch well, swifts have kind of weak feet that are and legs that are back, so they have trouble with locomotion, on the ground. There's also some belief that they may be related, believe it or not, to hummingbirds. So again, this is an area that is, I'm sure, will be uh, the result of a further study to try to get greater clarity about the relationship. But right now, the kind of position, the Capromogiformes is between the owls and the swifts. Okay, next one. The overall, again, order, the Capromogiformes is a worldwide group. They are found, of course, in North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. I don't know if anybody's been birding in Northern South America and seen oil birds, but they're the lone representative. Yeah, and in fact, oil birds, as you may know, are one of a very few select group of birds that are known to echolocate, like bats do. So that gives a unique character. Then you've got the potus and ear nightjars and frogmouths. Potus being a South American bird, and the frogmouths are being of Indonesia and Australia. I think I can't not look at a frogmouth or a potu and not just get a smile on my face. They really are kind of comical looking birds. And I encourage you after the program and next couple nights, just Google image frogmouths and potus, particularly when they're young, and you'll get a kick out of them. I think they probably served as the basis for any number of cartoon characters. What we're going to focus on, though, is the Capra mulgidae, which is those representatives that occur in North America. And again, totally throughout the world, this whole order, there's 125 species, some of which are exceedingly rare. One actually is known from just one wing of an individual found in Saharan Africa. Truly was described as science based on one wing of a bird that, I don't know, it's roadkill, but in a sandy tire rut. And then again, you've got others that are extremely common. Next, Ariel, please. So now we're going to focus a little bit on North America. And so, again, this is the Caprimulgidae. This is the largest family of goatsuckers within the whole order. About 100 of the 125 species are either nighthawks or nightjars. And I want to just focus quickly on those that are found in North America, and perhaps you've traveled around the country birding to see these. But we've got, again, the Chuckwell's widow, which we'll talk a little bit more, is found on Long Island in kind of low breeding density. Whippoorwills, which are a bit more common. The Mexican whippoorwill, which was broken out as a distinct species, I think it was about 15 years ago. And then you got common poorwills, parroquies, buff-colored nightjars, and then you've got the three nighthawks. I only put two here: a common nighthawk, Antillean, and then it's the photo of the lesser nighthawk, which is found in the southwestern United States. Next. And there's songs. One of the compelling aspects of this group of birds are their songs or calls, and happened to just pull out. I was listening to Hank Williams and heard that song. I guess it's a fairly popular song of his, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," where he actually references the whippoorwill. Again, these haunting calls that are done incessantly. Really remarkable that they will call for just on end, dozens of calls in a row, sometimes hundreds of calls. You think that that would be uh, a non-adaptive behavior simply because of the amount of energy it takes and the fact that it could attract predators. But nevertheless, as you sure you know, you've heard these, they do indeed call very frequently. Okay. Um, just very quickly, Audubon, Wilson, and Catesby um, knew about these birds and um, painted them. And so you've got Wilson on the left, Catesby in the middle on the bottom, and then of course the flourish that Audubon had separating them from those other two artists of the Whippoorwill, Chuckwill's Widow, and the Nighthawk down in the lower right. So these early ornithologists certainly knew about these species. Next, a number of neat adaptations that they have. Perhaps most notable is their tapetum lucidum, which is a creates this eye shine that you see, and I've seen this any number of times. Of course, with a flashlight shining on one of the goatsuckers. That's a group of very fine cells on the back of the retina that glow and enables them to see very well in low light conditions. I don't know how they match up quite exactly with owls, but given their fairly nocturnal habits, I suspect they're certainly acute at seeing in darkness, and maybe they see every bit as well. Some of the species have what we call rectal bristles, which are highly modified or adapted feathers that are like cat whiskers that line the mouth, and that is used by most notably whippoorwills, chuckwills, widows, and those others that are in the that group of to help and train prey. And also, it's thought that they developed to help protect the eyes. You can just imagine one of these birds flying up to hit a fairly large beetle. If it missed, that beetle could hit him in the eye. And so it's thought that those bristles serve a dual purpose. Again, you can see on the left there just how large their mouths are. Lower left, you can see they got actually pectinated toes, like some herons do, that enable them to really kind of straighten out their plumage in a kind of interesting way. And then on the upper right-hand corner, you see torpor. Another whole neat aspect about these birds is that I stand to be corrected, but I think that it was among the goatsuckers, and particularly common poorwills, where the whole concept of torpor was first understood to occur in birds. And this is based on apparently, I think it was an ornithologist, a birder maybe, or an ornithologist hiking out west in a canyon, walking along a trail, and there was a common poorwill on a cold winter day that was locked between this rock and a larger rock in his crack. And he saw it and realized that it was kind of sleeping. And again, one thing led to another, and realized that this bird, which we now know many other birds do, but this was common poorwills were the first, I believe, the first known species with regard to torpor. Okay, next. And again, another not salient aspect, but salient aspect about this group, particularly again those that are found on Long Island or found in North America, is their incredible cryptic coloration. And you can see that just some slides I took off the internet. I challenge you, the biggest photo of all, to find the whippoorwill that's sitting there. It's actually facing at you. I don't know if you see those two leaves that are a little bit green that are horizontally shaped next to each other. If you go down into the left of those two leaves, that's the bird looking right at you. Again, you can see the others here that really suggest just how incredibly cryptically colored this group of birds is. Really right up there, like with American woodcock and a few other birds. Okay, next slide. And here's an example where, again, you might be walking along on a trail and you see the understory there on your left, fairly open understory, looks like some sedges and some leaf litter. And you would probably walk on by and never see the whippoorwill that's facing you there, that's within that circle. Again, quick story I could share with you. I was birding with some folks down in Texas in one of the state parks, well-known state parks. and we'd gotten word, like many people, that there was a pair of Parockies, and got this local intelligence where to go, and we went there. And if you just take a look at the room that you're sitting in, be it the study or your living room, take that about that size of that room. Well, we were told there were two Parockies sitting in an area that size of the room, and it was bounded by trails on all sides. And it took us a half an hour of with the binoculars scanning the forest floor before we finally found the Parockies. That's again how exceptionally camouflaged they really can be. Next, uh, the uh, the three species we have on Long Island, again, common nighthawks, chuckwills, widows, and whippoorwills, are sexually dimorphic, a fancy term for bird, that has, or species that has males and females that are of two forms or dimorphic that you can identify with a little bit of focus. You can certainly see that in a upper left is a male common nighthawk, and the upper right's a female common nighthawk. And generally, where, as I mentioned, where males have white, females have buff. And this is an important trait for the nighthawks that we use at the Nighthawk Watch. Because you not always, but you can often tell if you got a male or female based on looking at the buffy throat patch. Similarly, both chuckwills, widows, and whippoorwills can be separated by their tail, where the males almost always have white outer tail feathers, while the female have buffy colored ones. Okay, next slide. Their nest, you can see I put it in parentheses because it's actually hard to argue it's a nest. There's virtually almost no effort, or very little effort. I mean, I have read that whippoorwills will kind of scrape, they'll create a little depression on the ground. These are all ground nesting birds, and typically they are obligate two egg layers. And because they're ground nesting birds, they can be subject to predation. It's one reason why this group of birds is declining, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Um, because where you have suburban development, even large tracts of open space, but you have development, people have garbage cans that then support larger concentrations of raccoons and possums, and people let their cats out. Ground nesting birds are disproportionately impacted, and that's certainly been the case with the goatsuckers. Next slide. You may have heard about this, but nighthawks, I don't know of any whippoorwills or chuckwills, widows that do this, but many decades ago, ornithologists started noticing that common nighthawks will nest on gravel roofs. And in fact, New Hampshire Audubon for a while was pioneering an effort of trying to create nesting habitat. You can see they're putting down sand in Keene, New Hampshire. It didn't work out all that well. And in fact, there's some researchers out west that have been documenting this, and had mixed success, again, because you can imagine the nighthawks are really subject to such heat during the day, with the sun just beating down on these roofs. This is a phenomenon that is slowly disappearing as gravel roofs, give way to other types of materials like rubber. I do remember when I used to work for the state legislature, I would go to Albany, and often after the legislative session, before it got dark, I would go out into the skyline of Albany. And Albany was one of the best places. I would watch several dozen nighthawks zipping around the buildings in Albany. Undoubtedly, these were nighthawks that were nesting on some of the gravel roofs in downtown Albany. I don't know if that still happens. I don't know if anybody has seen that, but it certainly at one time did happen, and I'm sure it still happens to some extent. Next slide. Here's the young. They are kind of semi-precocial. They're not fully, active when they're born, but they're not altricial. They're not like a, baby robin where they're helpless and blind. They are born with good vision. Again, just like their mom and dad, they're cryptically colored as well, which makes sense, again, being on the ground like the way they are. Okay, next. Okay. Another interesting, I think fascinating aspect about goatsuckers, particularly whippoorwills, is that they're one of the very few species whose life history is tied to the moon. And this has been documented in any number of studies, but the whippoorwills time their nesting so that the chicks will hatch out about 10 days before the full moon. So on a waxing moon phase is when they will, lay their eggs, and then as the moon gets stronger and stronger and sheds more light, it makes it easier for the parents once the young to hatch out to be able to hunt. Um, Whippoorwills and chuckwills widows are kind of ambush predators. They'll sit on the ground, and I have seen this in the dwarf pine plains at night. They will fly up from a perch or from the ground when they say, a medium or large sized moth or beetle, and just, take it out of the air. And so you can imagine it really be helpful if they are sitting with a full moon and watching these insects fly in front of the face of the moon and just to the side. It could really aid their ability. So it's kind of neat. It's we don't often think about birds that their life history is tied to the moon, but whippoorwills are a great example. I do not know. I've looked online. I can't find it. I need to pull the monograph for birds of North America to see if they say anything. But I wonder if the same thing is true with chuckwills widows. I don't know if anybody knows that. But and again, another neat aspect about this group of birds is the tie to the moons. Okay, next one, Aaron. So their diet. The uh, uh, the two groups of birds. Again, the night jars, which are the whippoorwills and the chuckwills widows. Again, that's the whole Capra broken into the night jars and the nighthawks. The night jars, as I mentioned, feed on much larger insects. They'll feed on giant silk moths. They'll feed on medium-sized moths and beetles. Prionid beetles, you can see down below. Um, while the nighthawks really feed on very small insects, and they behave differently. They're again flying mouths, truly, and just vacuum clean the atmosphere as they're flying along, picking off midges, mosquitoes, gnats, and other smaller insects. If you see that Chuckwill's widow on the right there, you can see the arrow there. It says, I mean, you see the reading what it says, but northern water thrush. You don't think Chuckwill's widows or a goatsucker would be a predaceous bird, but their mouths are so large. If they can opportunistically find this songbird, they will consume it, need it. And this bander actually had this experience with this Chuckwill's widow. So next slide, please. So now just a little bit about the species. So Chuckwill's widows again are really found in North America and then overwintering into Central America and extreme North and South America. But they really are a bird of the southeastern United States. That's where they're common, and you can see that kind of orange-colored, rust-colored range area where they come up the coastal plain, and they really peter out on Long Island. Long Island is pretty much the northern extent of the Chuckwill's widows range in throughout the Western Hemisphere. And then in the winter, they move further south again into even eastern Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Okay. Next one. Whippoorwills are a real bird of eastern North America. They have a distribution further north, as you can see, but they also overwinter in the southeastern United States and then in this arc in eastern Mexico into Central America. Next one. And here's the hemispheric globetrotter for you, common nighthawks. This is a bird that has got one of the largest breeding distributions throughout North America. You can see way up into Canada, just really falling out where you lose the tree line, and then in southwestern United States where it's displaced by the lesser nighthawk, and then they take off and migrate to South America. And I've got some papers I've read, and actually didn't think that I should have put one of them here, that actually 12 common nighthawks that were banned in British Columbia were had loggers put on them, and 5 of those lasted a year, and they were able to follow them, and they all crossed from northwestern Canada, southeastern across the United States to Florida. 4 of the 5 island hopped through the Caribbean to South America, then down to the northern part of the Amazon. One of these birds decided, I call it contrary Mary. She broke across the Gulf of Mexico. I'm not calling it the Gulf of America. It's the Gulf of Mexico, to Yucatan Peninsula, and then down the land bridge to join its mates. And then in the spring, turned around and came back basically the same way. So Common Nighthawks will undergo an annual range, excuse me, an annual, migratory distance of, 3, 4, 4,500, maybe even 5,000 miles. Really remarkable. Next slide, please. There are efforts to try to quantify what's happening to goatsucker populations, and it's the College of William and Mary, working with the Virginia Commonwealth University, that has put together this whole protocol at the Center of Conservation Biology, where there's this nightjar survey network. And I just encourage you, if you want to, you go online if you want to learn more about it, to see the effort. This is not conducted in New York because DEC, as the state agency, it has basically does apparently all the work. I've talked to them about getting help by birders, but like many other states, it's mostly the occurrences as part of this are found by birders. But in New York, it's doesn't have the opportunity for you and I to provide this information. Of course, we could provide it through eBird and other data sources, but not through this particular monitoring program. Just want to be aware of that, though. So what's happening to the species? So what I thought I would do is you take a look at the 1980 to 85, the first breeding bird atlas on Long Island, and then the 2000 to 2005 one, and of course we're in the middle of finishing up this next one, and which is 2020 to 2025, which I'm really curious to see what will happen. I just looked at what are the quadrangles. So you can see that in the 1980 to 1985 data, there were 262 quadrangles that had nighthawks possibly breeding within them, 170 probable, and 45 confirmed, for a total of 477 quadrangles. By 2000 to 2025, nearly 20 years, there was a 71% reduction in New York. You can see it there quite graphically. On the right-hand side there. And you can see again how Long Island has really diminished in terms of the nighthawks. I've only seen one nighthawk on Long Island during the breeding season in June out in the Pine Barrens about 8 years ago. And that bird was flying around, made me think, and in fact, it's right near one of those quadrangles. You see those two little quadrangles that out by Riverhead there. I was right there. I suspect that was maybe a breeding nighthawk. But again, they're in trouble. Okay, next slide, please. Unfortunately, whippoorwills are experiencing the same decline, although not as precipitously. You can see between the two again, from 80 to 85, 564 quadrangles had either confirmed, probable, or possible breeding. By 20 years later, it was down to 241. It's 57% reduction. And you look on Long Island and you see those quadrangles. That's the Pine Barrens, folks. That's where the strength, and also some places on the South Fork. But that's really where, if you want to hear whippoorwills in any frequency, a couple of them calling at one time, you really have to go out into the Pine Barrens, I find now. Okay, next. And then Chuckwell's Widows, which, as I mentioned, just comes up the coastal plain, petering out on Long Island, has also undergone a decline, with a mere 21 quadrangles back then to only 8 20 years later, a 62% reduction. So next slide, please. So you can see that from the North American Breeding Bird Survey, North American nighthawk populations, and I just use nighthawks here, but it's certainly true for whippoorwills, it's true for Chuckwell's widows, and it's true for other aerial insectivores. And that's something I want to say, that these birds belong to that guild where they make their living, right? Feeding on the wing. And other birds in that group, of course, are swallows and swifts and flycatchers, and they are all declining. But I just highlight the one, common nighthawks are declining about a little more than 1% per year right now. Next, please. And I wanted to show you, so chimney swifts, which is a pretty common bird, you see it around. Even chimney swifts reported from 3,124 quadrangles in 85, down 15% to 2,652 quadrangles in 2005. And again, I'd be curious to see what the 2025, once the new breeding bird atlas is published, what it shows for these aerial insectivores. Okay, Ariel, next, please. So out of interest and concern for particularly for common nighthawks, we back in 2017, we being the Four Harbors Audubon Society, uh, commenced a watch, a common nighthawk watch at Frank Millville Park, right on the Stone Bridge, and you can see where it is in Setauket. Yep, the larger aerial photograph, and then the lower left one, a little bit closer, and then the one on the right. You can see the clearly see the two kind of linear ponds to the north and to the south. And what happened there, why we started this was I had moved to Setauket in 2016 after 35 years living in Massapequa Park, and I just did not see it during the fall, which is when you really typically experience nighthawks, right? You see them in the spring a little bit, but heading north, they disperse. In the fall, they really do funnel and concentrate on Long Island, crossing over the Sound, hitting the North Shore, and we think what happens is they are up high enough that they see the ocean to the south, and they tend to then break west. They put on their right turn signal and head west along mostly the northern half of Long Island to a certain point. Then they break across Long Island because they get to be Massapequa. I just don't remember at John Burns Park when I lit up at night. That sometimes would attract nighthawks, but I often would not, not very often see them with any numbers. Well, the first fall we moved in, Carl Safina gave me a call. Carl's a neighbor of mine, two houses down, and he said, "John, I know you love for nighthawks because I, used to talk about them." And he said, "Well, I was just at the mill pond, and I had 12 nighthawks that were feeding back and forth over the North Pond." I went back the next night, had good numbers the next night after that. And so we started realizing, my gosh, there might be something to this about where we're positioned in this north-south axis to catch birds coming from the east to the west. And so let's establish this Stone Bridge Nighthawk Watch. Okay, next slide, please. So here's the view. If you stand on the main, the paved road looking north, that's the pond. That just on the other to the end of that pond, there's a dam that spills into Conscience Bay, if you know that, which is part of the whole Port Jeff Setauket Harbor Conscience Bay complex. And then looking south, that's even a longer linear pond that heads about a half a mile or so. And so that gives us a really good view shed, both north and south, so we can catch birds. Again, coming we thought would be mostly east to west. Well, long story short, it's much more complicated than that. But that's the view if you go to the Nighthawk Watch, what you will see. Next, please. And here we are. This is just a slide of, again, many dozens of slides that I have. This is a social event of the Three Village area come from August 27th through October 6th. For 41 nights, we stand on the bridge and we count nighthawks. You can see there I am pointing upward at, I assume was a nighthawk, and there's some other people you may know. There's Carl Safina just to my left looking up, and a few other individuals that you may know, some members of Four Harbors Audubon, and then others. Again, it became a bit of a family event. One of the things that have happened, which I didn't fully appreciate, we've got a board. I didn't show you the board. I could actually have it in the room here, an informational board that two-sided that got a lot of information about nighthawk ecology and biology. What I didn't appreciate when we first put this together was the valuable migratory bird conservation aspect to it, where this Nighthawk Watch, people go walking by, people drive and stop and go, what are you guys doing? This is going to be going on for years. I've had as many as 40 people at one night standing on the bridge, on both sides of the bridge, I should say, both sidewalks. And they're very interested to learn. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about birds, bird conservation, the trouble that a lot of birds in, and hopefully be able to instill a bit of an appreciation of a conservation ethic with these people. So next slide, please. So here's the totals. So from 2017 to 2024, you can see we've had the first 4 years are really, first 5 years really good, peaking out in 2019, where we had again 2,757 nighthawks passed by in those 41 nights, and then you can see since 2021 a disturbing trend downward. And last year was terrible. 669 nighthawks, almost twice that amount the year before, and that was only 50% or well, no, 2/3 of what it was the year before that. So those numbers are alarming. We don't know what it means. We do know that in 23 and 24, we've tracked and we chatted with other people, pretty clear that there's probably some aspect of the fires in Eastern Canada influenced either nighthawk reproductive success or just affected how they migrated south. But these are the numbers since then. Next slide, please. And this is what we do. This is from the first year. We had 2,046 nighthawks. We count the number of minutes. And that year we total 3,984 minutes, 41 days. And what's really the critical thing is how many birds per minute, right? It's not the total number of nighthawks. It's the number is how many birds per minute, because if you have different minutes, it can affect the outcome. And so there's just 3 slides that people took of common nighthawks flying past, and those are all males. You can see the bright white throat patch. You can see the banner marks that really run from the front of the wing to the back. Females have slightly smaller banner marks, and these males also have, you can see that white smudge kind of in the tails, which the females lack. So these are 3 nice common nighthawk males. Okay, next, please. And then two of our most magical days actually got spoiled a bit. The very first year, on just about 10 days in, we had 573 nighthawks pass through in one night. And those are just the people that were on the, again, we tally who's there as well each night. And some of you may know Eric Powers, by the way, who is a well-known conservationist and environmental educator. Look at you can see we had a kettles of nighthawks, which don't often think about. Of course, kettles of birds of prey at inland sites, but to see these kettles of nighthawks was quite amazing. So, okay, next, please. Well, that pales. I wish I could say that that's really impressive, but there are a few other common nighthawk watches in the United States. One that takes place up in New Hampshire for a week in the fall, late August, and then a longer one that takes place in Duluth, Minnesota, at the extreme, as western end of Lake Superior. And so they're very well positioned. Nighthawks are coming down, they're draining out of Canada. Again, remember that map. They are a common breeding bird throughout the southern half of Canada. They hit Lake Superior. They do not want to fly across open bodies of water. Why? Because again, they're aerial insectivores. You don't have large concentrations of their food base out over Lake Superior, or in our case here, out over the Atlantic Ocean, right? And so they will fly across the Sound because they can easily see Long Island from Connecticut, but they don't like to, again, fly out over more extensive water bodies. So they break west in Lake Superior and through Duluth, and look at that amazing numbers. Imagine being there and actually seeing 14,000 nighthawks on August 21st, 2013. Talk about being jealous. But again, I was just so excited. We had 573 at that one night. But anyway, so it is pretty hardy, and I do hope to get out to the Duluth sometime in the next couple of years to try to experience something like what they have experienced there. Next, please. Okay. Concluding our talk here is that Farmers Audubon, on behalf of Farmers Audubon, I wrote a petition to DEC, given the decrease in their abundance, as again evidenced by the breeding bird surveys. I wrote a lengthy 4-page letter giving all the documentation as to why we thought these species should be reclassified under the state ENCON law of either endangered, threatened, or special concern status. Lo and behold, slowly, but here we are in 2025, the agencies finally come around and they intend in this state wildlife action plan, the 2025 version, they're going to include common nighthawk as a high priority species of greatest conservation need, and Chuck Will's widow is a species of greatest conservation need basically the one tier below that. Whippoorwills are still, I guess, abundant enough that they're not included in that. Next slide, please. So that is it with regard to the presentation of our native goatsuckers. I would encourage you, again, August 27th through October 6th. Thank you. I was just going to get to that in a second. To invite you out to the Stone Bridge Nighthawk Watch. It is a fun event. Some days or nights or dusks, I should say, evenings, it's downright magical. Other days it's quieter. But we always have other birds. There's the kingfishers that constantly are flying around. We get these large flocks of mixed blackbirds, grackles and things that fly over and land in Conscience Bay in the Phragmites beds to roost for the night. Bald eagles often fly over. We get birds of prey moving through our migration. So again, I encourage you. I know it's a bit far from those of you that are down at the South Shore of Nassau, but we've had people actually come all the way out from Pennsylvania. So I would encourage you to come out to the Nighthawk Watch if kind of whetted your appetite here. And so let me conclude by thanking both Patrice and Carl Safina for the use of their photos. And I'd be happy now to try to respond to any comments, questions that you might have.
John?
Yeah.
Oh, Steve Finkelstein here. How's it going?
Steve, how are you?
I'm good, man. I've been wanting to come out for the last few years to join you guys.
Yes.
I always, life happens.
Right.
There was one year I was like, all right, it's on my calendar. And then again, something happened. But something that I noticed, I was curious to see what your numbers were going to be this year. Ever since we moved, I lived for a while in Glenwood Landing. And then for the last 28 years, I think, we've been living in Westbury. And I taught for 28 years at a school a mile and a half from home. And
right.
Every year, I never saw nighthawks when we were up in Glenwood Landing. I had learned about them when I was back in forestry school back in the 80s. But then once we moved to Westbury, I noticed every year around the end of August, beginning of September, I would see nighthawks flying over my house here in Westbury. It was kind of a good thing.
That makes sense.
And it's kind of, I was like, oh, there they are. It's so cool. And of course, it's like, oh, shucks, that kind of means back to school, back to work, of course. So a harbinger of, good and bad, I guess, whatever. But I noticed that this year I didn't see any.
Yeah.
And something else that I've noticed, since I'm 5 or 6 years old, I've been looking at insects. I'm really, really into bugs. And I don't know about you guys, but forever, in the middle of the summer, I forgot to bring in the mail or whatever, you open up the door at night and invariably a couple of, moths or something's going to get in the house. And I noticed for like the last year or two, I opened the door and there's no bugs around the light outside my door. And everybody, worldwide, people have been noticing a decrease in insect biomass. So it seems like there's a correlation. I don't know if there's a cause and effect or whatever.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you off. You still got something more to say, but
no.
To respond to a few of the things you said, your perceptions, I think, are quite accurate. Ecologists now have kind of raised the alarm about insect abundance throughout the world. You may have even heard the phrase insect apocalypse that's happening. And the measure that I use, and I've actually read a lot of other people online that have had the same experience. I remember, again, growing up in Smithtown, and this would be driving in the early 1960s, mid 60s, late 60s into the early 70s. And my dad would drive the car. And during the summer months, if we went any distance, let's say I was going to drive, because we lived in Smithtown, if I was going to drive from Smithtown to Westbury, for example, to go visit you, the windshield would have had the fluid on 2 or 3 times to clear the insect guts that are on the windshield. That just doesn't happen anymore. The last time it happened for me was a bird trip I led in Western Texas about 20 years ago, and it was unbelievable. I felt hard. I mean, I felt terrible. The insects that were dying hitting the windshield, but it was, once again, I felt like I was back in Long Island in 1960. So yeah, it's clearly thought that those insectivorous, the aerial insectivores, again, the swallows, swifts, goatsuckers, and flycatchers are all declining primarily because of a diminishment in insect populations, so they can't sustain them. I think about a common nighthawk, how many midges and mosquitoes and other small animals, small aerial insects, they have to eat to sustain their flight. north. The other thing I want to add is your observations about Westbury kind of support what we've been saying. So we think again that birds do head along the North Shore of Long Island for a ways, and then either Western Suffolk County or more probably eastern to central Nassau is where it seems like the nighthawks that break across the island because they're heading to the New York Bight, and they'll then cross over at Staten Island and then head down the Jersey coast. That's what we've been able to document to some extent. And so if you didn't see them really in Glenwood Landing too much, that's right. That's northern Nassau County.
Right.
And right it out. So now I do know, if you know Stefan Perot, who a really fine birder from the Green Tree Foundation, Stefan has undertaken a more informal Nighthawk watch at the Green Tree Estate in Manhasset, right off Shelter Rock Road. And he gets some numbers, but doesn't get the numbers that we've had over the past 8 years. So
Thank you very much for your talk, dear.
well, thank you.
Yeah, I remember nighthawks when I was a child.
Yeah.
In Ronkonkoma, they used to fly over in groups. I can't forget what season it was, but it was always warm out. And I remember watching groups of 5 or 6 come every couple of minutes over the house.
It's so neat. I find their flight more than any of the bird to be absolutely mesmerizing. I can just look up at the sky. It's like a drug. It's like weird for me, but I just stay there with a bunch of the people, and you see these birds. They look like these huge flying mouths. And if you watch their flight behavior, they in fact I had a common nighthawk fly in a way that I didn't know a bird could ever do. Where they're of course they're visual feeders or hunters, and they're seeing these small insects. I mean, I can't see these insects really at all. Although, by the way, I should have added this before. Another reason why I think that site with the Stone Bridge Nighthawk Watch can be so productive is the insect hatch that comes off both those ponds. I've been there when there's been a hatch of just tens of thousands of different, small. I'm not sure what they are. I would like to get them actually identified the species, but it really, this bird was flying, and it looked like it not looked like it slammed on its brakes, threw its wings forward, and its tail down like a rudder, and broke up to the right and turned in a way that I just didn't think it was possible for a bird to do, a 90-degree turn, and because it must have seen an insect that it wanted to try to catch, and so again, their flight is just remarkable, and so again, I encourage you, obviously, either down your way or come out to the Nighthawk Watch and enjoy the experience of this really unique flight behavior. What they'll often, last thing I'll say is what they do is when they're flying oftentimes, and I don't know why they do this, they very much remind me of a golden retriever that's just come out of a pond. It's going to shake its fur off. They'll fly along and go like this a lot. And I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know if that's to startle insects. I mean, they do have those. It's thought that those 2 battle marks that they have is used by the nighthawk to startle insects so they can see them. A little bit like northern mockingbirds do. When mockingbirds are on the ground, they flash their wings in their white wing patch. It's thought to have a similar function. So maybe that's why they're doing that. But anyway, they really do have a pretty interesting flight behavior.
I've seen mockingbirds pull their wings over their head, and those 2 dots look like eyes of a larger animal.
Yeah.
I mowed a lot of large grass areas in my day. And I've watched that behavior before.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.
Welcome. Thank you for participating.
All right. Bye-bye.
How much of an effect do you think climate change is having on these birds? Because it's certainly affecting a lot of other species.
That's a excellent question. Actually, it took a little bit longer for somebody to ask that than I thought it would. The concern, there's a real concern, and you've probably read about this with a whole bunch of birds. It's not by any means unique to the goatsuckers. This temporal or timing mismatch between their migration and the food prey that they need to sustain them. This is happening. There's concern. We're working on right now horseshoe crab conservation, wearing my Seatuck hat. And one of the concerns that has been documented as the coastal waters warm up. Will that mean horseshoe crabs actually come to spawn earlier in the season, and red knots and other shorebirds still come at this basically the same time? There's a mismatch, and the food resource might not be there for them. Well, the same thing with these birds. The concern is that by the time they head north, maybe they are um, having reduced abundance in these insects that they need to sustain them. I don't know of anybody that's done any detailed work with regard to goatsuckers and climate change yet. Probably somebody has, but I think just generally that's the concern, is this, again, temporal mismatch between the birds migrating and the insects they depend upon at the time they hatch.
Are being found, and we see this right here in New York, that have never really ever been here before, and they're increasing in numbers because they are just looking for a better place with the right temperature and all the food. That's why we're seeing some really unusual geese that would not common at all in New York. Now that I go on eBird, I say, wow, where did these come from? And I'm seeing it more and more. I think that's just the trend.
Yeah. I mean, birds are also, I mean, I want to add, as you very well know, birds are very opportunistic, and we humans tend to think of things statically in that, the birds that are here are always the birds that have been here. But in fact, that birds are constantly pushing the envelope, right, in terms of ranges and moving east, west, north, south, or what have you. And sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't. So there's the backdrop of that, that's constantly always going on. But there is real concern, legitimate concern about, I mean, the climate change is the mother of all impacts, right? And potentially could affect virtually all of the life forms on the planet. Some for better, probably most for worse.
John, I wonder if you can comment on the sound that their wings make. My first experience with them was in the Moosehorn Wildlife Refuge. They could not hear any cars. We were in the middle of nowhere up in Maine, and they would come diving down, and you'd hear, it sounds like a
Well, that was pretty good. That sounded good. I think you're going to attract a female nighthawk. Be careful.
But can you hear that? Is it just a mating thing, or is it just physical?
Yeah, it's a mating thing. I've seen that, or I've seen it and heard that in a few places. The last place where probably the place where it's most remarkable, and I watched it for about half an hour, is up at Seney National Wildlife Refuge in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And the tracks of Jack Pine Forest, it's open. It's just really great common nighthawk breeding habitat. And these birds will do that. So for those that aren't familiar with nighthawk breeding behavior or courtship, the males will fly up, and then a little bit like almost like a woodcock, they'll plummet straight down to the earth, and right before, like a woodcock will then land right in and paint and look comical as they strut along. Nighthawks will actually do a 90-degree turn and continue low along the ground, 2-3 feet off the ground, moving horizontal to the ground. And that 90-degree turn creates that whoosh in the wings that Steve just did so well. It reminds me of like a Chinese fan that you go like. And again, I've seen that or heard that in a few places, and as you did up in Moosehorn.
But you don't hear that if they dive down for prey and then make a sharp turn, like you never notice it.
I've never heard that at the Nighthawk Watch. No, that seems to, and even I didn't hear when that bird did that, what I mentioned before about that 90-degree break upwards, that really seems to be something that occurs during the breeding season. I mean, they're dropping down from, 100, 150 feet, flying fast towards the ground. It's amazing how that, I think that bird's committing suicide. When I first saw those, I was a little bit surprised, like what is it, didn't know quite what was going on. And then the bird just turned and did that whoosh sound.
And do other members of the family have that also, that same phenomenon?
Yes, yeah, I think both the Antillian nighthawk and the lesser nighthawk do that. The night jars do not. I've never. They do other vocalizations. They do some neat. I've heard there's the whippoorwills. If you get, and again, I want to make mention, by the way, that each year Steve was mentioning about this walk. Each year, Farmers Audubon, I typically lead a walk out to the dwarf pine plains to listen at night for whippoorwills and chuckwills widows around the the full moon. And the best we've ever had is I think 14 whippoorwills and 3 chucks, and the worst we've ever had with 3 whips and no chucks. Um, so the coming across some whippoorwills occasionally may have disturbed them near nest, but they'll fly up and do this chirp. It's kind of, if you go online, you can hear it. It's a totally different vocalization than the classic whippoorwill that you hear. And they do this again. They'll fly with their banner marks in their tails, just going like this, and they're agitated. They're annoyed. So anyway. Just some other behaviors, yeah, or other vocalizations.
Say, John, have you ever heard anything if they use echolocation, like say chimney swifts do?
I don't know of any other. Um, I don't think any other member of that order, except oilbirds, echolocate. And then, of course, there's, as you know, some Asian swifts that are known to echolocate as well. I think there's only 3, 4, 5 birds in the world that are known at this time to echolocate, and one of them is in in the group that we're talking about.
Thank you.
Do nighthawks nest on Long Island?
I'd like to think so. I mean, they did it one time. We've worked hard as heck to preserve a lot of pine barrens, thousands, tens of thousands of acres. By the way, I just had a meeting with the Southampton supervisor, and she announced they're buying another 87 acres of nice pine oak forest, upland forest in the Pine Barrens, adjacent to existing conserved land. So the effort to continue to buy land is continuing. We keep pushing all our governmental partners to do that. So I like to think nighthawks are. I don't know of. I couldn't take you out to a site, unlike whippoorwills, where you could take you out again during the breeding season and definitely hear them. And I don't know where to take you on Long Island. Now that's why again I'm really curious to see when the 2025 breeding bird atlas comes out, if there's some birders that have been what they've been able to document for that species on Long Island. It's definitely been. I know that the famous Roy Latham, and one of the greatest naturalists Long Island ever produced, has report in his Common Nighthawks breeding in the North Fork of Long Island, breeding at Orient. They like again gravel open areas, and he actually reported them breeding on the gravel beaches on the Orient Peninsula. So, but that's a long, long time ago. A lot before there's the populations of humans that we have with our dogs and things. So. Anyway, is there any oh, that's it. Christina's announced her son heard the booming display at Calmsett last spring. That's wonderful. That'd be great to try to better document, because if that booming display is occurring, there's a good likelihood that there's a potential mating pair there.
What month would that be?
I don't know. It's Christina. I'm just looking at the comments in the chat box, and she said that. Christina, are you still on? If you could, maybe you could share when if you know when she just said last spring. So again, when I had it at Sini, it was early June.
John, are there other nighthawks over at Plum Island?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I wonder again. The thought has occurred to me. We're working hard to preserve Plum Island, you probably know, and there's all the gravel beaches and sand, and it makes me wonder. But I've not been there the time of year to really be able to document. I wouldn't be at all surprised that nighthawks pass over, and in fact, there's that fairly large wetland in the southwestern corner of Plum Island. Given the insect hatch off that, I bet you nighthawks probably come across Connecticut, coming down from Rhode Island, draining down from New England and Eastern Canada, and I wouldn't be at all surprised they They come across, they see, Plum Island, and they say, oh, there's a resource where I can hunt over it and then fly back and forth over. In other words, I'd love to be at Plum Island in late August or early September to see a nighthawk occurrence. I've been there 4 times, but it's been different times, not that time of year. So.
What was that you were
Rita just
saying?
said that she thinks it was May that her son
Uh-huh.
heard that.
What was that you were saying about the DEC, sort of like they didn't want a citizen science thing or something, like they didn't want input?
Well, I would say they didn't want input, but that program exists for entire Eastern United States, and in many states, citizen science, you and I can based on a protocol that you need to get from them. And I can't remember all of it, but you might get like a 20-mile route, and you stop every half mile, and you listen for whippoorwills or chuckwills, widows, depending where you are, and document it. A lot of states that again citizens can participate in. I reached out to those people because I wanted to do that in the Pine Barrens on Long Island. There's a couple of routes I thought, I laid out, looked on the aerial maps and said, my gosh, that would be a great 15, 20-mile route that I could do. And I was told that New York State doesn't participate in the program because the inventory effort's done by state DEC. I've chatted with state DEC and I can't find anybody that actually does it. So it's a little bit of a uncertainty to me about the status of that program in the state of New York.
John, I want to thank you. I thought it was really a very well presented and interesting program. I've never seen a nighthawk, and I would like to go out, and participate in the watch. What time of day are you usually there on the bridge?
Yeah, so we are again August 27th through October 6th, 41 days from 5:30 p.m. till dusk.
Oh,
So early in the season, of course, we're there for like 2.5 hours. October, by the time early October comes, it's less. It's like an hour. So yeah, so if you can make a note of that, or just go into a Four Harbors Audubon, there'll be some reference to it. But it's 5:30. We start promptly at 5. I mean, literally at 5:30, we start our watches and try to be rigorous about this. So, yeah.
and
Yeah.
start counting, huh?
What's that?
And start counting.
We start counting. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I guess because I never saw a night. Maybe I thought you were doing it at night. And I said, that doesn't sound like very easy, but okay, you do it at
Well,
sunset.
the Nighthawks are more, I should have said, maybe I didn't say that. Nighthawks are crepuscular. That means they're really, they're active during the twilight hours of dawn and dusk. The night jars are really more nocturnal birds. So yeah, you saw by those photos, those 573 Nighthawks, you could definitely see Nighthawks very, very easily, readily during the day. Or again, it's later in the day, but you can.
Yeah, I would recommend it to anyone. I've gone out there the last couple of years and I haven't been disappointed.
Oh, good.
I haven't seen 500, but I've seen 25.
Okay, good. Well, good. So you put us under such pressure we're under when you show up. You got to produce.
You know it's going to be a good day if I show up.
That's right. Your good luck charm. Yes.
I guess they don't perch much, do they?
Actually, I could have inserted a photo. Yeah, they do perch. In fact, what
Dude,
they I was just going to say thank you.
this is what they do all day long.
Yeah, they're. I've seen this maybe a dozen times in my life, particularly nighthawks, but also whippoorwills. Nighthawks will really perch longitudinally along the main stem of a limb. They don't cross it, like other birds will perch and be like, like that. They will sit on it, and I'm not quite sure why that is, but their legs are not particularly strong, or their feet, and so I'm not sure why they do that. Whippoorwills and chucks, that when I've seen them perched, tend to be more of a diagonal, like a 45 degree, like the one you're showing there. It's a little bit off kilter.
Its legs are collapsed underneath it.
Yeah.
Balancing the branch.
Yeah. But you can see, nighthawks perching. Again, I saw them out in McGee Marsh. I led a trip out there years ago, and we had some nighthawks that were perching. This was in the spring, and so they're heading north. Again, you don't get the concentrations of the funneling effect like we do again on Long Island or in Duluth, Minnesota. But you'll occasionally see them. In fact, I remember comically one nighthawk at McGee Marsh. It was so windy. I was just shocked this bird didn't get just dislodged from the branch it was on. I mean, it was howling 25, 30, 35 miles per hour. And the bird was somehow hanging on and sitting again across the, not across the branch, sitting longitudinally on the, long ways on the branch it was on. Kind of interesting to watch.